Okay, so we're going to be talking about smart self-care, which is a term that I've coined. As you'll see in a moment. So we're using an evidence-based framework that I'm going to be sharing with you today, which is called the 8 Tensions framework. And it's about taking stock of how you run your life, indeed your therapy practice, your business, and how to make active, practical decisions. If you haven't got a notepad and pen in front of you, I am going to actually ask you to do stuff. So please grab one while you can. And hopefully the aim of these exercises that we're going to do today and the whole framework is to get you in an emotional state where you're thinking in your peak state. So you're making decisions that are going to bring the best out in you. And therefore, this is something which I think we can all believe in, which is, if you are showing up as your best self, then this is going to benefit your clients and your craft. So this is all about sort of developing yourself so that we can bring our best self to your case, your therapy sessions. Now, I'm sure we all know a bit about existential definitions, so I don't want to spend long on this, but just show you how I interpret existential psychology. So we're talking about how people experience universal life issues in the context of their personal lives. And what we're going to be looking at are 8 overarching life issues and looking at it in the context of your life as a practicing therapist. And some key concepts here, which I'm not going to read out particularly, but lots of juicy stuff. Actually, I am going to pick out time, future, choice, and openness as being particularly relevant for the tensions we're going to look at today. So the other points of existential philosophy, which just want to remind you of, that there's no external blueprint. We must make decisions and we must own them. So what I'm going to show you is a framework, but within that, you're going to sort of move a slider, if you like, from A to B. And it's very much up to you where you put that slider. And these are livable questions. So I'm going to ask you questions that are going to help you interrogate your complex actual life, because all our lives are complex and messy, and rather than sort of deny that in some way, we're going to sort of embrace that and say, okay, it's messy, so what are the relevant questions we can ask ourselves? So in terms of tensions is my word really for life challenges. So I don't mean that they're bad, I just mean that they exist, and that we all share them. So my last sort of bit of theory here is I follow Moss and his definition of authenticity, which is about a person taking their thrownness and making it their own. So very much thinking about the context in which you're operating. You're not free to make any decisions. Emphasis being on any. I mean, you are free to make decisions, but you can't do anything. It's in your context in which you find yourself, and that's what we're looking at today. So whole point then is making deliberate decisions and reflecting on these, and I'm actually going to get you to do some of this thinking work. So drum roll for the 8 tensions. These are they. So this was derived from my doctoral work. I'm not today going to go over how I got to these. It was through empirical work and about 144 hours of audio and an IPA analysis. But more, if you do want to know any of that story, then you can look at this top article here. But and if you want to go more into the philosophy of it, look at the bottom article. But for now, we're taking a different approach today. We're going super practical. So I'm going to spend a bit of time now talking about how this framework works and then how we're going to apply it to you. So first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is this equilibrium sign. So if you remember from sort of high school chemistry, and I did used to be a chemistry teacher, which is why I have a slight affinity for equilibrium signs. It means that a dynamic equilibrium is constantly balancing. It's not about a perfect balance. One side the products are constantly being remade and going back to the reactants, and the reactants are constantly reforming into the product. So there's a dynamism, and that's what I'm trying to capture by that sign here. So these 8 tensions, and you'll recognize, you know, people familiar with existential work will be able to even say, I think, in some cases, you know, which philosophers said which things, and often they often said similar things, of course. So taking the first one, narrowing down and opening up. So for all of these, we're not saying you're a narrowing down or opening up person. We're all both. We're saying there are some points of our lives, some points of our weeks or days, in fact, when we need to be more narrowing down, and there are some times when we need to be more opening up. And so what I want you to do is I want you to think about this in terms of a line, and think about where you are now, and you know, you can draw your own line, where you are now and where you want to be. Now, if you're in the same place as where you want to be, then you don't need to take any further action on this tension. It means you're in a good place. But for a lot of us, where we are now is not actually where we'd ideally like to be. And we're going to see now in a moment what steps we can take to go in the direction we want to go in. There's no positive or negative on any of these directions. It isn't like opening up is good and narrowing down is bad, or vice versa. They just exist. And there'll be some points in our lives where we want to be more opening up, and some points where we want to be more narrowing down. I'm just going to go back again to the general thing. So there's no value judgment on either side. You can decide where you want to be at any given moment. You can imagine these perhaps as like little sliders where you're going to sort of slide something across and sort of find where you want to be. I also want to reiterate that there is actually, I would say, I don't know if I'd go as where I say it's a bad thing, but we aren't aiming for the middle. We aren't aiming for balance. This isn't like, oh, we need a balanced life. No, that is not what this is. This is, you know, where do we want to be that's useful for us right now in our practice or in our business or personally. In one of the books by Kirk Schneider, he talks about this, you know, the time when we're in balance, the time when we're effectively dead. We want dynamism, we want movement, and the whole premise of this is that we're constantly oscillating along these tensions, like really all the time, and which begs the question, how often do you need to check in on these? And you know, I'll leave it to you to work that out, but it's the sort of thing that I check in maybe every quarter with myself. Where am I on these different tensions in my practice and in my business? And some of these tensions will be more salient at some points than others. As we go through them today, you might think, oh, this is the tension I want to really spend some time thinking about. And there might be another was like, you know, I've got that one. I really don't need to think about that. And that's fine. The other thing is to think about the domains in which these operate. So you can think about these in terms of your personal life, your practice as a therapist, you know, I don't know, in some other domain of life as well. I think it's important to understand that you could be narrowing down, for example, academically, opening up therapeutically, and personally doing something else. You could potentially have, you know, 3 domains or more. But I think for the purpose of tonight, think of your actual therapy practice or one domain, so that doesn't get too confusing. Right, so anything else I want to say about those tensions? I think we're going to move in straight away into one of the exercises. Okay, so this is so I'm actually going to ask you to draw a tree. Mine looks a bit stylized, as you can see, but you can draw it as you wish. So first of all, when we're working in this way, which I'm going to invite you to today, it's playful, it's diagrammy, it's you know, it's colorful, and do, you know, grab some colors or whatever you want. You know, I think this is part of the process that helps you think about where you want to be. I should actually mention why I've called this smart self-care, because self-care, which is a phrase that's, I think, hackneyed now, and I think it doesn't really mean anything anymore. I think it could mean it can mean anything from having a manicure to having a bath or having a walk, but that's not what I mean at all. It could mean that, but by smart self-care, I mean this business of taking a deliberate look at where you are on these specifically existential tensions, which I've made it maybe in a more grounded and sort of what's the word, like a more sort of friendly way, if you like. So they're just like there and colorful and got an easy labels, relatable labels. And by going through this process that we're going to do tonight, this is what I think is smart self-care. You know, am I in the place where I want to be? And if not, what steps can I do to get there? And, you know, making sure that these steps are small but doable. So let's go now to the opening up side of the tension, of the first tension. So the question to you is, what ideas, frameworks or models have you collected? What do they have to offer and what do you want to do with them? So what I mean by this is, you know, you're here tonight and this might be one of the frameworks that you've heard. I'm sure you've been to many lectures or read books recently, or just heard different ideas, and you can actually just draw them as like branches of a tree, you know, so different things you've heard of. So different things you've heard of and you're sort of curious about. So I'm going to give you a moment just to draw your tree. I will do this at the same time, and to write on the branches of the tree, what models have you collected, or ideas or frameworks? What do they have to offer, and what do you want to do with them? And it might be that you can combine some of the branches, and actually there's something you might want to do with them in a combination. So I've got my notepad here, so literally just drawing a tree with branches. There you go, that's my tree. Writing down some things. So one of the things I've got very interested about recently is about team coaching and about psychodynamic group processes. And you know, you will have other things here. Something else I'm very interested in the moment is about the concept of flow. Now, as it happens, for me, these are very easily linked, and there's a whole concept, for example, of flow that happens in teams, and indeed the psychodynamic theory of what happens in groups. So these for me are very linked, but there are also some things that I've sort of finding out about that aren't linked. So I'm going to write those on my other branches. So hopefully you've drawn a tree and you've populated it with some interesting stuff that you've found out about. And this is opening up, you know, you've opened yourself up to different things in the last few months. And I think it's good to take stock of what it is you have opened yourself up to. You know, when you attend a lecture or you read a book, you know, what happens to that information? It could be nothing, which is a shame, because, you know, it's good to record it somewhere, otherwise you may forget about it. If you're anything like me, I have a terrible memory, so it's good to record it somewhere. But often we end up with these, well, I do, these sort of piles of notes, and nothing happens with these notes. So the next thing is, what do you want to do with them? So if the answer is nothing, that's fine. At least you've made a deliberate decision that you're not taking that any further. That's the whole point. But actually, there might be some juice in some of these ideas, and actually you want to incorporate it into your practice, or you want to read further, or you may want to go on a further course, or except, you know, whatever it is. So you might want to use another color or whatever and say, what do you want to do with some of these things? So and for me, there's some writing I want to do about some of these things. So there's a book in me about some of it. So one of the things I want to do is a bit of writing about some of these things. Yeah, there's also potentially there's some books I'd like to read as well that I've got lined up that I want to explore. So this is a very quick, rough and ready sort of capturing how you've been opening up at this point. So now we're going to do the reverse. We're going to be letting go of stuff. We're going to be narrowing down stuff. So I want you to look at this visual. This is a cupboard. It's meant to be a cupboard. So if you could just draw your own version of a cupboard. And what I'd like you to do is, okay, here's my cupboard. It's like a bow tie. And in your cupboard, there are, which you could think of as your practice, there are lots of things in your cupboard at the moment. So, you know, you might have a certain type of client, or there might be particular models or techniques you're using. You know, you probably have a supervisor. You know, there's all sorts of you might be thinking about your advertising, how you're getting new clients, for example. So there's all sorts of things in this cupboard. So it could be your academic, you might have academic work, and there's lots of ideas you have potentially for a thesis or a dissertation. So this is like a bit like a mind dump of like the stuff bubbling away in your brain. So if you put that in your cupboard now, so just draw it, you can either write words or put little images of some of the things that you're thinking about. Give you a couple of minutes to populate your cupboard. Right, and what we're going to do, we're going to do a bit of decluttering, but this is imaginary decluttering. So we're going to see what the cupboard looks like with some of these items removed. Now, just experiment. So if you take off one, so one of the things I've put in there is a book, because there's a book that I'm writing at the moment about smart self-care. But if I, for example, quite shockingly crossed the book out, you know, do I like what's left in the cupboard, or is it a bit shocking that, do I feel bereft that that's no longer there? No, it's okay, you can put it back again if you don't like it. So I do feel a bit bereft that that's not there. I'm going to just put it back in. But if there's something else that I can cross out, and like, can I cope with the fact that it's not there anymore? And when you experiment with taking some of these things in and out of your cupboard, remember, it's something, you might have something that doesn't belong there for the next 3 months, but you want to put back in again in January. It's not goodbye forever, but it might be not a great time for it right now. So this is a very temporary cupboard. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about this. So here in the middle, what is important to keep in your cupboard, and what needs transforming? what needs leaving behind, as in letting go. So are there some, like, dried pasta is a stalwart of my cupboard, right? That's got to stay. So what's your stalwart go-to dried food that has to stay there? And what needs transforming? What just needs an actual change? And what just needs to go? At the bottom here, I've written, if you want to free up space for new things, you have to toss out old stuff. And, this is very much decluttering. I'd like to bring in some existential psychology here. You may be familiar with this term of becoming, Heidegger's term. He says we're always on the way. So we're never still, we don't have a fixed essence, we can change direction and we can reinvent ourselves. And that's what I want you to think about in terms of the cupboard, that you can reinvent what you're doing in it. Just because you've been seeing the same type of client working the same sort of way for the last 10 years does not mean you have to do this for the next 10 years. And when is that inflection point? Like on a graph, like there's always that turning point of a graph when it changes direction. That's called in maths an inflection point. I'm saying this as if I know anything about maths. That's like some residual from when I was 18. But the point is that, that inflection point might be now. This time of change where you flip and do something else may well be right now. We're always moving. I always think of us as that we're on a constant conveyor belt, whether or not we want to be. What are you moving towards completing? And what are you looking to plan right now? Is there a piece of work that's coming to an end? I've written coaching sessions, but of course I mean therapy sessions. It might be some therapy sessions that have coming to an end with a client. And are there like different pieces of work that you're looking to plan for the future? The idea of a conveyor belt might be itself a good image to use on a bit of paper, thinking like you're moving. So this is, you on a conveyor belt, you're moving, you're going that way. What is here? What are we going past and what are we going towards? And of course, we're always going past something and towards something. There's nothing you can do about that. That direction of travel is set. But what we can do is we can deliberately choose what we're moving away from and what we're moving towards. So I'm going to move on to the next tension, which is treading water, pushing forward. In fact, just before I do this, one more thing, sorry, I wanted to say about narrowing down, opening up, is that I wanted to say about what happens if you go too far in either direction. So if you go too far towards opening up, you can become, your sort of gaze is too diffuse and you sort of don't end up doing anything because you're just, oh, that's exciting, that's exciting, that's exciting. And then you never sort of put down any roots. You sort of keep on collecting those trees, those branches, but don't put down any roots. But if you go too far towards narrowing down, then you can become so focused on what you're doing that you miss new opportunities that you may well be more interested in than the thing that you're focusing on. So there is a danger being, too far. So this is why we need to check in that we haven't gone sort of too far down one road. It's also why it's dynamic, because there's a certain pulling back every now and then. Right, so treading water, pushing forward. So treading water in a swimming pool takes an enormous amount of energy. You're not moving anywhere in terms of, moving from A to B, but you're moving your feet. And it's exhausting staying where you are. So I don't want to diminish the effort it takes to maintain the status quo. It takes a lot of effort. In terms of pushing forward, there are some times in our life where we take on a new project. Maybe you've got a new position at a university or in your therapy group, or you're making a new program or something like this. And it's a change and you're really going for it. So when you're pushing forward, the danger of being always pushing forward or doing this too much is burnout. Is, you know, keep reaching for the next new thing, busy, and you know, it's just not sustainable, that level of sort of adrenaline pumping, all that sort of stuff. The downside of doing too much treading water is that if we, and this is something from Rollo May, is that we can become stagnant. So if we don't have enough new interests, we sort of become psychologically stagnant. But both of these can be very positive. So with treading water, there's a phrase I'd like to introduce you to, which again I sort of coined, which is proto-creation. So proto meaning like a prototype, so like having a sort of embryonic idea of what something looks like or could be, and creation as you know. So we often chastise ourselves for procrastinating, and I find this such an unhelpful concept, procrastination, and I've just completely banned it from my vocabulary, and I've now replaced it with proto-creation, which signifies that our brain is doing a lot of mulling over something when it looks like we're procrastinating, but actually I think 9 times out of 10 we're gestating, we're incubating an idea. Other ways of looking at this proto-creation is that we're lying fallow. You know, this treading water is all about just having some breathing space. And you know, we've just come out of the summer holidays, and I'm sure almost everyone had some time off. And you know, sometimes I feel it's a bit daunting having the time off because it feels like there's so much to catch up on when you come back. But actually, I'm sure many of you can share my experience. You often have your best ideas when we're doing nothing. So I guess that this is saying it's okay to do nothing, and it's very productive to do, inverted commas, nothing. And this is also called a pause. Well, we could think of it as a pause rather than doing nothing. Sometimes we need to engage in deliberate forgetting, meaning when our head is too much in sort of a cognitive mode, working our way out of a question or a problem. Often the answer is go for a walk, and try and not think of the problem, or go to bed, you know, go to sleep, and the answer will just emerge on its own. So this sort of pause, this treading water, is often the key to having good ideas and solving problems without doing that sort of very cognitive work, which we all probably do a lot of. Now, how do you push forward? It's all very well saying, you know, you've got to push forward. And I think a lot of this is about the intrinsic motivation. External rewards, extrinsic motivation is not a good way of motivating yourself. Lots of studies have shown that if you engage, if someone says, oh, I'll give you this amount of money if you get this done, or you know, you'll get a job promotion if you get this done, actually that's really unmotivating. And what we all need is this intrinsic motivation, some other reason, personal reasons why you want to push forward on the thing you want to push forward on. So think of something that you're trying to get off the ground or push forward with, and can you write down 3 personal reasons why you want to do your work? So not maybe because someone's dangling a carrot in front of you, but because there's something deeper in you about why you want to do this pushing forward. Give you a minute to collect your thoughts. Now, these reasons will change, and I don't really believe in the idea of, you know, you see lots of studies about purpose in life. I'm hugely skeptical of the concept of purpose in life, because I don't think I could at any point identify that, or at best it changes all the time, so it's kind of like a bit of a meaningless concept. I'm sure that's quite controversial, so I'm looking forward to someone to tell me no, there is definitely, each person has one. But I think the thing I feel most comfortable asking people to do and discussing is this sort of 3 personal reasons right now why you want to push forward on this specific thing, rather than this sort of, you know, grand plan. I don't really believe in these grand plans. Now, I just want to mention about setbacks, because when we push forward in things, we're taking a risk, and this is very much from Rollo May's work as well, that you know, it takes courage. You know, what's his book called? The Courage to Create, I think is his book. I'm a bit of a blank there, but I think so. You know, he talks about the courage it takes to produce new stuff and to create, and that in our case might be getting new clients, working in a different way, getting some other form of project off the ground, whether it's a book or an article or whatever. And when we take great risk, there is always the risk that someone says, no, I don't want to work with you. Your article's not allowed in this journal. Your book's not for our publishing house, you know. But I think that the smart self-care way is to say, actually, these no's are great, because the more no's you get, you know, that's complicated because I just said a different no. Anyway, the more no's you get, it means that you've been making a lot of offers or proposals. If you get no no's, you haven't asked any question. You haven't put yourself out there. If you're getting like no's, it means you're putting yourself out there, and it also means you're bound to get a yes very soon. That's why yes lives in the land of no, because you're asking the question and someone's going to take the bait or whatever, run with your idea. You just haven't found that person yet. So I never find no's upsetting. I just know the yes is around the corner. And of course, there might be some feedback with the no's that's going to help you get that yes. I'm not saying you never change anything as a result of a no. So are there things or people you want to make offers to, which could be it could be in a very broad sense. As I said, it could be a writing thing, could be new clients, could be something else. And I suggest you sort of set yourself a goal of something like, you know, I'm going to make 5 offers this month, or whatever number suits you, and actually to track it, note the date, know what your offers were and what happened with it. And I think that, you know, the more we ask, well, obviously if you don't ask you don't get, but the more you ask, the more comfortable you are at making whatever sort of offers we're talking about. So this is probably not one to do this second, but to say, track some no's and watch the yeses turn up. Right. Lateral growth. We're still on this idea of treading water. So rather than pushing forward, we can think about consolidating our position. I love this phrase, lateral growth. And lateral meaning side to side, rather than pushing forward, you know, you think about it's sort of going in a particular direction, but actually we can do this consolidation pause, if you like. So the question for you now, what skills and habits do you want to consolidate rather than move forward with? And this means pausing and dwelling and staying and lingering, not surging ahead. So this is back to treading water. And I think lateral growth is a better word for it than, I don't know, I'm not sure, you know, I'm sure there's other words, you know, what are you doing, you know, anything changed? No, nothing new. Well, actually you can replace that with, yeah, I'm growing laterally right now. So I think that's a handy phrase. We're moving on to our third tension now, which is owned action influenced by ideas. So owned action, I think I'll start with the other side actually. Influenced by ideas is, you know, we said about, you know, we're hearing talks like this one, you're being influenced by me now. There's books you're reading, there's schools of thought, there's study, you know, there's just talking to friends, whatever, colleagues. You are constantly being influenced by ideas. If you do sort of go to the extreme of that, you just become a mouthpiece for someone else. You just regurgitate what they've said, and it's sort of not, you haven't made sense of it yourself. You hear that a lot in undergraduate essays. They just regurgitate. Oh, that's a terrible generalization, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so it's like a regurgitation of what's been said, and rather than like, you know, and what do I think, or what's my position. Owned action is when we do something with those ideas. So just to give you an example, in my own doctoral work, I interviewed a student who was studying about animal, like the animal husbandry industry, so, you know, farming, etc. And when she studied about like sort of what was going on in farming, she sort of became a vegetarian almost immediately. That's a great example of, right, I've got these ideas, I've learnt them in quite a dispassionate way about animal farming, and I'm owning action by taking a stance. Now that's quite an extreme stance in terms of, like, you know, I don't know how many ideas we hear that makes us change a lifestyle. You know, there may well be something that's made you sort of change your lifestyle in some way. Now, if we go too much down the owned action path, we can become too idiosyncratic, which means that we sort of become too set in our ways and aren't open to the fact there might be a better way of doing things that might emerge. I read recently that George Lucas of Star Wars director fame, that I read, why didn't he write those first 3 Star Warses first? Like, why did it start on episode 4? And he said that he knew that episode 4, 5 and 6 were more like set on individual stories, but episode 1, 2 and 3 needed like massive drama and backdrop and cities, and they didn't have the budget for it. But more interestingly is they didn't have the technology for it. Like, he knew that the like actual camera stuff would improve and graphics. Anyway, but if he'd have just said, no, I'm going to do like episode 1, 2 and 3, you know, yes, he might have made it in his own way, but you know, there was something about holding out and being influenced by the technology of how it would emerge, to how those films would emerge. So let's look at an example. Now, I'm going to slightly condense this, but I wanted to give you the full array of questions. So when you think of a technique you're using, or a theory, or a key term, and for me it might be existential would be a great idea, is a great example of this. You might think of something yourself that you use. So for me it's existential. You think of a technique or a concept or model that you use or want to use in your work. It could be anything. Now, what I want to get at here is, what is the owned action version of this idea? So we've got this idea that, you know, existentialism has been discussed for you know, at least 150 years, if not more. But how I use it is very specific, and it's manifested in these tensions. So the influence by ideas is the general concept of the thing, whatever you're thinking about. and how you're interpreting it is your own action. So I'm going to talk you through some prompts that are going to help you at the bottom arrive at what's your own action version of this big idea. And it's the sort of thing that you might write on your website, because if you say, oh, I use this technique, you might explain, for example, how you operationalize that, rather than someone else says, oh, they're an existential coach. That might look different to what I do. Right, so I'm going to walk you through these. So think of the technique. What do you really mean by this concept or technique? Not what's the dictionary definition. What do you really mean by this concept or technique? Jot down your thoughts. Next, what is the concept or technique unlike? So in my case, I might say it's unlike positive psychology, as an example. So what's the thing you're thinking about unlike? What is it like? What's it similar to? So it might be that, I'm thinking of my example, it might be that it's very similar to I'm thinking of the book, maybe someone can help me, Ryan Holiday, Stoics. You might say it's very similar to Stoics. Sorry, brain process. Right, I might say it's like Stoicism, if you like. Okay, so what's yours like? When have you heard about this before, and in what context? So, for example, I've heard about existential philosophy very much from Emmy van Derzen's work in the context of my doctoral work. How is your context different? And so how are you using the concept differently? Well, I might have heard about it in my doctoral work, but how I work with it in practice is, as you can see, is quite different. So how is your context different? And so how are you using the concept differently? How is the context similar? And so how are you using the concept similarly? So the context of my doctoral work is similar to what I'm doing in the sense that it's very robust. I feel like, you know, I could pretty much tell you every source I'm using, and I feel very confident that it's come from a great deal of reading. So that's like the similarity. How am I using it similarly? The basic tenets of what existential psychology is, I'm definitely using in a similar way. How might you put the concept in different terms? So rather than the trotted out version that you see in a textbook, how might you put it in different terms? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this? What are 5 examples of this concept in use, or 5 applications? Now 5 might be a stretch, but can you think of different ways to actually apply this technique or theory or term? What are examples of the opposite of this concept? For me, the idea that somehow we're innately programmed to become something that's decided from birth, and we're just growing into, you know, just the natural process, that's opposite of what I think. So what's your definition of the term or technique? So bringing this together, what's your definition? And often we define things in terms of what something is not. You know, unlike such and such, I think that this is blah, blah, blah. I appreciate you won't have time to do all of this, but maybe this is something you can come back to, and pin down how you will operationalize the often used theory, technique, model in a unique way. So for me, it's how I use this framework. That's the thing. And I use it to supervise coaches and psychologists and therapists. Right, we're moving on to the 4th tension. So being you, fitting in. So this is our first social tension. You might think, what is possibly the negative of being you? What happens if you're too much being you? I think I'll start with the other side. So if you do too much fitting into a group, you know, you just become one of the herd, which is obviously Heidegger's what he actually said anyway about fitting in. You know, you might end up doing things you don't want to do, that you don't agree with, and that way, you know, you're not doing something that you believe in. If you only do things you believe in, and you do very much being you, I think there's a temporal thing here, because sometimes it takes a while for, particularly in a group, like there's a certain amount of fitting in that has to be done before you can be you, because you might alienate some people before they fully understood like who you are and what you mean. So they might not even interpret what you're doing in a way that you mean. And this was brought home in my doctoral work, when one of the students felt it very important to stand up for things and sort of say her opinion. That was one of her values, to sort of be honest. Actually, how she expressed it was to be honest. And one of her peers said she was too honest, which we know is a thing. You know, it is possible to be too honest. And there was this. So how do you tell someone whose value is very much being honest that they're too honest? And it was too difficult to be with her. Like, it made relationships too difficult, because she might say something like, well, it was a bit without filter, the sort of things she said. And actually in social relationships, we do need a bit of a filter. So the question is, you know, do you want comfortable relationships, which might involve a bit more fitting in, or are you sort of okay with having fewer relationships potentially, where, you know, some people might move further away from you because you're not their cup of tea and you're showing it very clearly, but at the same time you might have deeper relationships because the people who do know you know full well what they're getting, and they do like it. So it can be a bit lonely. That's the downside, being you, and there may well be a certain amount of fitting in that we need to do. So in terms of being you, then ask yourselves, what are your medium-term aims for your practice? You know, not for the good of your clients, not for the good of society, for you. What are your medium-term aims for your practice? What are your loftier aims for your practice? So more ideals. And can you relate both of those to your very grounded aim for the week? You know, what are you doing in the week, and how is that related to these loftier aims and these medium-term aims? I mean, very much like the week you're having now. How does it relate to your ideals? Do you even think about your week in terms of aims and relating it to ideals? Going to move on to the fifth tension, connection separation. So this again is a social tension, and it can also be a conceptual one. It's both. So on the connection end, this is, you know, who do you want to connect with? Who do you want to have more connection with? So that's two different questions. This is who do you want to connect with? You know, you've got your close contacts, you might have your secondary network and a tertiary network of colleagues who you loosely know, secondary network of people maybe you see quite regularly, and a core sort of confidant group. So who do you want to make these connections with? And who do you want to separate from? Not all connections are good. Some are toxic. Some you're just bored of. You've outgrown each other. A bit like your cupboard, you've got to sometimes make way for new relationships by getting rid of some old ones. You can also think about this in terms of more conceptual things. You know, are there ideas that you want to be more connected to? And are there ideas that you want to separate from? Another way of thinking about connections is learning partners. I've invented a new word there unintentionally this time, partners. So who are your learning partners? You might not call them partners, but who are the people you learn with? It might be that you have a supervision group and you're learning from them, or you might have some colleagues who you learn from. So some questions for you. How can you increase the number of learning partners you have? Who can you reach out to or tap into to increase not your coaching capital, but your therapy capital, meaning like what you know about therapy? How can you maximize your collaborative conversations? You know, when you do have supervision, when you do have CPD, when you do just meet up with a colleague, how can you maximize these conversations that you have and increase the quality? Maybe there's an idea you've had today, like maybe you feel like we're learning partners, and there's an idea you've had today that you'd like to build on. And just going back to this idea of separation, in what way are you valuing a difference of opinion to your idea? You know, some people are going to be separate in the sense that they disagree. So in what way are you valuing a difference of opinion? I'm on, you might have heard, I'm the chair of the Division of Coaching Psychology, and we have a new committee. And we definitely have lots of differences of opinions. And I'm very much, you know, looking for the value in these differences of opinions and showing it to everybody. So I think it is valuable, but I think it's sometimes hard to articulate this value. So if there's someone who's rubbed you up the wrong way recently, was there any value to their opinion? Now we are nearly at 8 o'clock. What I want to do is just run you through the last 3 tensions, and then we'll have a discussion and any questions. So last 3 tensions. So day-to-day thinking forward. So yes, we need a plan. We need to have aims, ambitions. Otherwise, we're on this conveyor belt anyway. So, best to go to the place you want to go to rather than end up somewhere else. But if we think too much about the future, we neglect the present, and we might be a bit airy-fairy and not do the sort of hard work that you need day to day to realize that future. I think very much for me, this was about my PhD, which was a grueling experience of 7 years. And, yes, always looking forward to the end, but very much had to do the day to day to make that end possible, and the future that happen after that. If you do too much day to day with your head down and your eyes down, a bit like a blinkered horse or something, you might be being really industrious, but being really industrious on the wrong thing. There's no point being really industrious and find that you ended up, well done, you're a nuclear scientist, but you wanted to be something else. Fixed plans, fluidity of life. So this is the penultimate tension. It's important to have plans, because if you don't have plans, you can't take the next step. You wouldn't know what the next step to take was. But plans rarely go to plan, and all sorts of things scupper our lives. So we need to be open to the fluidity of life. If we do sort of too much fluidity of life stuff, again, we never commit to anything. We did in existential terms, and this is one of my favorite phrases, we make a contingent commitment. So we're committed to things, but we know it could go out the window. We could change our mind. We might get ill. There might be a pandemic. There might be a war, but we still go around our lives, about our lives, as if things are fixed, because that's the only thing we can do. Otherwise, everything goes into chaos. And finally, doing enough and going all in. So the positive of going all in, which is very much feels like that flow state that I mentioned earlier, where you get lost in the moment, you're really into what you're doing. This is a very great feeling, but are you going all in on the right thing? Again, if you sort of put your heart and soul into something that's not going to yield very much, it might be that you're neglecting other things that are more important. So what is the right thing for you to go all in? And doing enough, this is, sometimes it's fine to do enough. Getting by is hard work. If you do too much doing enough, maybe you're never finding anything meaningful enough. So you're sort of going by your life in a bit of a sort of in a superficial way, without reaching those depths of meaning that that are so important. So I'm going to skip over those exercises for now, and just to say, I'd like to know, what are you going to implement from your learning today, if anything? Any reflections, any actual tangible things we're going to go away and do or think more deeply about? If you could put it in the chat, I'd be very interested. So what are you going to implement from your learning today? Let's see what comes by in the chat. And if you are interested in having supervision based on these, based on this model, and using these sorts of exercises as a springboard about your personal development, as well as your client and your relationship between them and the context, then I'm also just going to drop a link in the chat, and you could have a look and book a if you want to have a chat with me about it, if it's a good fit for you. Yeah, so pop your thoughts in there. This is the link about supervision if you're interested, but I'm really interested from you in what's given you food for thought today, and maybe we can open this out and have a little discussion about that. And here's my contact details if anyone wants to contact me. So natalie@unicoach.org. Yeah.
Fantastic, Natalie. Thank you so much. I certainly have, my mind is buzzing with various different things, and because my memory is so appalling, I've already made notes, otherwise it will leave my mind. But really interesting. Is there anyone who wants to just comment on the things that have struck them most, or ask Natalie any questions from what we have covered today? As Natalie mentioned, you can either pop your hand up the old-fashioned way, or you are very welcome to pop them into the chat, and I will pose them to Natalie that way as well. Whilst I give people a few moments to kind of gather their thoughts, I mean, one of the things that came up for me, Natalie, was what kinds of things do you see that cause people to get stuck when it comes to this type of kind of reflection? I just wonder if there's kind of themes of areas of difficulty or stuckness that you've noticed when you've been working with people using this model.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me just call it up again, the entire piece, and then I think one of the things is this idea of balance. I think people get hung up that everybody's life should be perfectly balanced, and I know why, because it's a word we hear a lot, and I think it's like an unusual idea that we're not striving for balance. We're striving for like moving to the bit where you want to be, and I think people get stuck and they keep trying to tell me that, you know, I need to do a certain amount of this because I'm a certain amount of that, and so I think that's one thing. I think also that in those points of inflection that I was talking about, so when you have to make a change, you know, you sort of going down one path, and then, you know, when I've worked with my supervisees on this before, you know, it may well be that last month they were opening up, but something's happened that's caused them that they need to narrow down, and people get stuck thinking, well, was I doing the wrong thing before? And of course they weren't. They were doing the right thing for them then, but time's moved on, and the context, back to authenticity, the context has changed, and therefore they need to move. And just looking at this as a totally normal part of life, rather than have I in some way been doing something wrong. I'll give you one more example, because as well as supervising people, I also, the people who I coach are doctoral students. I coach them to finish their doctorates, and I run programs for universities to help people, to help their students do this. And one of the students was making massive progress, which is great. You know, they'd been on my program a couple of months and they said it's great, which you'd think was great, and they were terribly sad. And I said, why, you know, what's happened? And he said, because I've wasted the last 3 years. When look how much I've done I've done more in the last 2 months than in the last 3 years. What a shame. And it's like, well, you were in proto-creation, particularly with doctoral work. So much proto-creation, treading water, happens because you've got so much to synthesize in your head. You can't always be in that action point of pushing forward. So I think this can be a bit of regret as well that makes people stuck. But when you realize that we're sort of meant to be oscillating and dynamic, then I think that is a very freeing idea.
Yeah, I really love the proto-creation bit, and it links into something for me, which is a constant hobby horse, which is the kind of narrative that goes on a lot of the time, particularly in kind of social media, that we're all supposed to be doing stuff and we're all supposed to be constantly productive and functioning and, you know, achieving everything. And the kind of pressure that builds up in terms of feeling like you're kind of constantly like not succeeding in the way that you are. So kind of this idea that actually we're really allowed that, and there's something that is creative and nurturing and positive about that experience of not doing, I think is hugely important, both for ourselves and for anyone we're working with. Actually, I think it's a message that needs to get discussed more widely.
Yes, definitely. I put my phone on airplane mode religiously for at least 2 hours a day, which feels radical, and I don't know why it should feel quite as radical as it. It feels like I'm making like a stand against, you know, all sorts of things. But yes, embracing the proto-creation, embracing the pause, and, you know, making that part of your life. And also, you know, we haven't mentioned the M word, which is meditation. And I think it's important to say that, you know, there's very many ways of achieving this pause. Meditation may be one, doesn't work for me. But there's lots of other things we can do to pause. Actually, sometimes the pause is just to change. You know, the old adage, a change is as good as a rest. Fun fact about me, I've just taken up tap dancing, which is something I did as a kid. Do you know, to follow along what's going on in the tap takes all my mental energy, meaning I cannot think about anything else. It's just a factual impossibility. What a great way to, like, you know, unwind and not think about something else, you know. And exercise often does that, of course.
Any other questions? I'm going to give, oh, fantastic. We've got one up here. So from Carolina, thank you. I'm not a psychotherapist, but would love to become one. And I'll be implementing from today the necessity not to be distracted by too many aspirations, instead being focused on what really matters and where I'm going and how to manifest it and how I'm embracing it in the here and now. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there's something, again, you know, so interesting about kind of considering, as you were getting us to do, Natalie, you know, thinking how much stuff there is and what stuff is actually most important to us at this present moment and what stuff do we need to let go of. And sometimes that can be quite a tricky thing to let go of, whether it's ideas or projects or kind of even connections with people. And yet something that can be so refreshing about that. So thank you so much for that. I will continue to give people a few moments, but I was wondering, Natalie, is this something that you've used within your client work? And, and if so, how's that worked, and the kind of clients it's really, you know, been useful for, and your experience of that?
So I've got, so my clients, aside from the supervisees who I use this model with, that's the core of our supervision, but the programs that I run for universities to help their students finish, we use the same framework, and I get them to think about, you know, I think when they're with their supervisors, for example, it's very much like, you know, you're thinking about the work, but they rarely think about their work in a context of their life, the context of their life, and in such a holistic way. So for example, when we're thinking about narrowing down, opening up, that could be, you know, narrowing down on a chapter, opening up to different ideas in a conference, doing enough, going all in. You know, there are some chapters that you write that are more interesting to you than others. You know, not everybody likes writing methods, it's pretty dull, but you might go all in on a particular thing, and that's fine, because there's some things are going to do enough on, and some things it's not all going to be all even. I think this is like the whole point, is that not only is everything in life not going to be all even, but you can intentionally embrace that and say, okay, fine, the method is going to be good enough, but wow, my discussion is going to like be amazing, and that's where I'm going to put my energy. So it's also like where you're going to put your efforts and energy. So in my coaching programs, we go through those tensions week by week, and talk about it in the context of people's PhD lives, and it's sort of like academic therapy.
I can imagine that they find that incredibly helpful, knowing what it's like myself, to be able to get that kind of support through it. It's definitely tricky. Any other thoughts or comments? Pop your hand up or pop them in the chat. Aha. Other Natalie. Hi.
Hi. Yes. Hi, Natalie. So my first question that popped to mind was about burnout, but it also somehow linked in my second question about working with people that are completely struggling to find any motivation. And it feels like a lot of these, like working with what you're sharing here, kind of there's this kind of implicit idea that people already have that motivation, people already have that capacity to engage and to make changes. And I'm wondering whether you have had any thoughts with your model about people that are at such a low point, whether that's clients that are struggling or professionals that are at like that really burnt out stage, that they'd love to be able to say, yeah, I'm gonna work with these models or work with these ideas, but I can't even arrive at what the point is. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Anyone who's seeing any one of us tonight has come because they want to make a change, although they wouldn't bother seeing you. So I think that I'm going to give you a slightly long-winded answer, but one of the things that I think people need to hear, and feel free to disagree, as well as, like, the change piece and how you can help them shift. I think people just want to hear that it's perfectly normal to experience these life quandaries, and that they're not ill. They're just got a living, beating heart of a human. In fact, if you're not experiencing those quandaries, I think you've got something to worry about. And that's what I emphasize to my doctoral students. And what they all of them say, that they didn't know other people experience these issues, these questions. All we want to know from I guess our therapists and our peers and everything is that we're not alone in asking these questions of ourselves. So the people who are coming to you really low, they could probably identify on those tensions where they are, and feeling low, feeling sad is an amorphous feeling. And I think one of the horrible things about it is that it's quite difficult to unpick what we mean. Whereas when you give people like labels, or I don't mean giving them labels, I mean the tensions are themselves labels, they begin to articulate and they get a vocabulary of what exactly they mean. Do they mean they're stagnant? Okay, well, we can deal with that. The answer is get some new projects, open up, push, you've got the lingo for some answers. But often people just look at those, realize where they're at, realize how that's affecting them emotionally, and the answer's on the other side of the tension. It's staring them in the face. I don't know if that's answered your question or not, but that's sort of what bubbled up in me when you were asking it. So feel free to ask something again if I've missed something there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's helpful. And I suppose for this idea of being stagnant and creating new projects, definitely it has been, I'm thinking of a particular client at the moment who's struggling with depersonalization, has been given the diagnosis not by me but by someone previously, and has really latched onto that diagnosis, and that's a really big part of their life and their way of being at the moment. But this stagnation, no matter how many projects that they're engaging with, there's still this underlying sense of, but it's meaningless. And I'm wondering how maybe you would work, or how your model would help people with, okay, so even though I'm kind of playing into this idea, it's still not having any hit with my self, soul, being, reality, whatever that is.
the meaningless piece is something I kind of seem to talk about a lot, meaningfulness and meaninglessness. And I think this relates to tension 8, which is the numbers are irrelevant, there's no order, I just mean the last tension, going all in and doing enough. And I think this is why it's important that we need to, this also feeds back into something we were saying about intrinsic motivation and stuff, which is, I think people have been fooled in thinking that like there's this overarching life purpose. I mean, I hear it a lot and I'm like, why would you think there is? Like, what a peculiar thing to think. Now, I know that's terribly controversial, but actually an existential thought that isn't terribly controversial, the absurdity of life, etc., etc. And actually I counsel people to not worry about what's the purpose of life. Like that's a huge question, and let's not even go there. Let's find meaning from small tiny things in our day-to-day existence. I mean, I very much live like that myself, and it's like, I guess it's like a philosophy of life. And I think when I'm working particularly with the doctoral students, it's such an enormous project that can feel like hanging over you and all encompassing, and just it goes on for so long that it's almost interminable. It's not actually interminable, but it feels like the horizon just carries on. And the only solution to that is to find joy in each day and find something meaningful. And that could be anything from tap dancing to having a nice cup of tea, to like reading something that you find very moving, to help. And in fact, of course, Viktor Frankl said the answer to the question is to help someone else. The way you find meaning is by giving service to someone else. So the answer is the real answer is stop focusing on yourself and start helping someone else, and then you'll get the byproduct of meaning. And I subscribe to that view personally.
Yeah, me too, absolutely, me too. And I think one could argue to an extent that most people on a doctoral training there's something going on for them. Doctorate in counseling, kind of, there's something going on for them that's guiding them already, because this idea of being with others and supporting others. So absolutely, you give me a lot to think about. So thanks so much for your presentation, Natalie. It's been brilliant to meet you.
Thank you. And actually, about doctoral research questions, which is something I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about, like, everyone arrives at a question which may change, of course, but there's something there, there's something that's drawn them to the question, and it's sort of lumpy and amorphous, and it's like what I think I once called it, like primordial gloop, like it's sort of this raw stuff, and it takes a while to make sense of it and where it's come from and where it's going. But it's like you have to stick around there. That's the proto-creation piece. Like, it takes a while to work out what on earth's going on, and why have you chosen this topic, and what's going on in this topic, and why would anyone care, and why do you care? And it's like, once you've worked all of that out, you can write your thesis. But the writing of the thesis might be whatever, 6 months, a year. All that working out why anyone should care and why you care takes ages. And it's just like having the patience to sit with it and explore it. That's where people struggle. It's another point of stuckness.
Fantastic, Natalie. Thank you. I want to share this comment from Cameron. So said, "Hi Natalie, wow, what a lecture. I wrote notes till my hand hurt. I like very much the second tension relating to treading water. It's a new way for me to think about what really living means." Gilbert Chesterton wrote about how most people appear to be moving, giving the illusion of living, but are like a dead animal floating downstream in a slowly moving river, wafting about but not alive, just being moved by the water. He said to be truly alive much of the time is to swim against the current. I wonder now, after your lecture, if this links to treading water. Perhaps we are not merely dead when going with the flow, but merely developing laterally. It is hard to constantly be swimming against the current. Great talk. sorry about my long comment, and that took up tap dancing as a kid and has now graduated to Argentinian tango, which he would highly recommend. There's a chance for all of us there.
I've put that on my ideas tree as one of the concepts that I've just, you know, heard. So thanks for we'll look into Argentine tango, and I've got a few shuffle hop steps to master before I get there, but I'm getting there. Right, so this is, I don't know, Gilt Chesterton, if you can give me a reference of a particular book or paper, I'd love to follow that up. But in terms of responding to your fascinating comment, this is the whole of smart self-care, right? That people live in an unreflective way. There are very few mechanisms, apart from going to therapy, which obviously is like incredibly reflective, but for people who aren't in therapy, and indeed for therapists who may or may not be in therapy at the moment, you know, there is this point of not just doing the motions of getting up, going to work, going to bed, but like, is this how I want to live my life? Let's check in. Am I meant to be, should I go more this way? Shall I go more this way? The whole entirety of smart self-care is, you know, being truly alive and checking in. Is this how I want to live my life? You know, and I think that having said that, and what I think is you know, an important comment, which I have to think about where I've read this, but you know, if after you've reflected and you said, you know what, I'm just making this up now, but you know, I've done the reflecting, thank you very much, and I want to go and rob people all day. I feel really, you know, that's what really gets me going, and I'm going to be a thief or whatever. Okay, you know. Oh, I think this is a Sartrean thing. It's like, you know, you're being authentic, but you know, it's obviously not an ethic, you know, it's something that's unethical. So yeah, so where am I going with that? So I guess what I'm saying is different people, I'm always amazed at like how different people conduct and live their lives. You know, what makes one person, you know, really excited bores me silly, you know, and vice versa. So we might think someone's treading water and not doing something very exciting, and actually they don't think that. They're experiencing that as something very exciting and pushing forward. But anyway, the other flip side of what you're saying is that is about treading water as a positive thing, and I'd like to relate this to parenthood. I've got 2 young girls, and you know, a lot of my life is driving people and ferrying them, and you know, checking homework and spellings, and you know, on the surface this doesn't sound terribly exciting. Actually I really enjoy it. I actually find it almost funny, you know, when I find it a bit surreal. I'm sort of, you know, checking this these pieces of work, and I'm like, on the one hand I'm checking PhD work, on the other hand, you know, I'm checking a 9-year-old's paragraph, and I'm sort of giving it the same attention. So I find it sort of slightly amusing myself. But that treading water is the stuff of life. I mean, you can't push forward all the time. If your stuff of life, you know, the bits in between your exciting projects are not livable, then you have to look into that, because the mundane needs to be livable and even enjoyable, you know. And I, you know, so much of what I do is reminding people, back to the doctoral examples, how lucky they are that, you know, some of their biggest worries are, you know, am I going to read this amazing book today or tomorrow? I mean, that's a great question to have to, you know, if that's the only question you're grappling with, that's you're okay, you know. And there's a bit of context here, therefore. Anyway, so all to say is there's nothing wrong with treading water, and actually, you know, I like a bit of treading water, and it needs to be more applauded, I think. I also think one thing I haven't mentioned today is this idea of self-correction. I do think that ultimately we will self-correct. So like if you're that bored in your life, something will flip eventually, and you'll make yourself do something. Like, not if you're ill, like not if you've got a problem, but if you're sort of psychologically well, I think there is a sort of natural homeostasis where you're like, right, I've gone too much down there, I need to do this. And I think that's what sometimes draws people to doctoral work in itself. They're like, yeah, I was doing all that, it had no meaning, actually I want to go and read this all day. So even people's choices in like what they're studying, I think, is a bit of a self-correction of some treading water.